We are awaiting remarks from President Biden as Afghanistan begins a new era under the rule of the Taliban. The last U.S. troops leaving the country yesterday. Our next guest worked in the White House when the U.S. first entered Afghanistan in October of 2001. Ari Fleischer was the White House press secretary during the George W. Bush administration and joins us now. You know, Ari, you would think that ending a 20-year-long war, which is America's longest war, on one hand, would be a good thing, but then on the other hand, there's the consideration of who and what we left behind.
You know, you would think ending a 20-year war would feel good. I don't know anybody in the United States who feels good about where we are today in Afghanistan. You know, in the last 7 weeks, John, we've gone from a president who assured the nation that the Taliban, it was highly unlikely that the Taliban would control Afghanistan, to today, where the Taliban control Afghanistan. And you were in the briefing room, John Roberts, in October of 2001, when it took about 2 months to rout the Taliban from control of Afghanistan. And today, to hear that they're in charge, it's just a sinking, sickening feeling in my gut to hear that the Taliban runs Afghanistan.
So let me take you back to that day for just a second. There has been a point made that the Bush administration did not accept a conditional surrender of the Taliban back then. And if it had, would things be different today? What do you say about that?
No, I don't think it would be different today if they had accepted that. The mission was to rout those who harbor terrorists and to send a signal around the world that if you harbor a terrorist, you're as guilty as a terrorist. And that was a clarion call that the world needed to hear and the world responded to in 2001. Now, I will say the mission got bogged down. There were a lot more complications after the rout of the Taliban than we anticipated, and that lasted for 4 administrations. So this is where, is there a case to be made that the troops could have and should have been withdrawn? I've always been open-minded to that. I'm open-minded to an argument that we could have stayed as well with a very limited number of troops. The president's got tired of making that message. But the point for Joe Biden is if he had the country on his side to withdraw the troops, why didn't he do it right? Why didn't he do it well? When I hear that we've evacuated 125,000 people, that's nothing to brag about. It's because we abandoned 125,000 people who required evacuation. A proper withdrawal would have allowed, over the last several months, for them to take commercial flights out of the airport through American quarters, through American and Afghani protection. That didn't happen. That's why this is such a major evacuation.
You know, I started this by saying who and what we left behind. In terms of who we left behind, Secretary of State Antony Blinken acknowledged that there are a number of people who did not get out. Listen here.
We believe there are still a small number of Americans, under 200 and likely closer to 100, who remain in Afghanistan and want to leave. We're trying to determine exactly how many. We will keep working to help them. Our commitment to them has no deadline.
So, Ari, we still don't know how many Americans are left in Afghanistan. Jennifer Griffin suggesting that her sources are saying that many of them may be infant children born to legal permanent residents when they were here in the United States. But how do you get them out? I mean, the State Department, the White House says, oh, yeah, we've still got leverage over the Taliban. But do we really?
Well, first and foremost, President Biden promised us we would. And then he walked away from that promise. So the question, how do you get them out, really needs to be addressed to the president, and he's got to address that in his remarks today. At least I hope he does. Getting them out, John, is going to depend entirely on the mercies of the Taliban. Having commercial flights leave with Afghans aboard them will depend totally on the Taliban. Everything in Afghanistan is now up to the Taliban. It is no longer up to right or wrong. It's up to power, and the Taliban hold the power.
Now, in terms of what we left behind, take a look at this. We'll put this up on the screen. This is what we gave to the Afghan military, much of which still is in existence. 33 Black Hawk helicopters, 169 armored personnel carriers, 22,174 up-armored Humvees, and 358,530 rifles. If you're trying to create an army, that's a pretty good start.
Yeah, we're kind of the defense contractor to the Taliban inadvertently, aren't we? You know, this is where I miss Donald Trump. When I hear Donald Trump say that he would have blown to smithereens any of our equipment left behind, you know what? I believe him. And I think the Taliban believe that too. And that's why they feared him. Does anybody fear Joe Biden? Does anybody think Joe Biden would take whatever action is necessary to destroy that equipment that was left behind? And the answer is no. And this is where America finds itself in the world right now. And in the president's speech today, he's got to be very careful not to take a victory lap. He's going to have to find that medium point about being glad that he ended the war, which will be his phony words. We haven't ended the war. It's now another war being fought by other people, without taking a victory lap. And I don't know how he's going to acknowledge all the mistakes that were made and the problems that now are resultant on the ground in Afghanistan, including a gigantic armed Taliban terrorist force.
Well, we will find out what he has to say in about an hour and 20 minutes or so. Ari Fleischer, we'll get you back in our next hour as well, because we got more to talk to you about. Thanks. We'll see you soon.
Sounds good, John.